All right. Today is Tuesday, March 8th, and this is not a recap for the stock market. This is a macro discussion only. We will do the stock market analysis, the charts, and all of that in a later video coming out this evening. But in this video, I want to discuss the sanctions against Russia and the impact on the global economy when it comes to stagflation. We will go over the impact of sanctions on the Russian economy and the alternatives that Russia has. We will also talk about the impacts of Russian sanctions on the EU, and then the impact of these sanctions on the US economy. And then we'll talk about the hypocrisy of the EU when it comes to the Russian sanctions. And lastly, we'll conclude with a message from me about America's stance on this conflict, what it should be and what it shouldn't be. But we start with this. Yesterday, we got a glimpse of hope on how this conflict will end because Russia came out with 4 conditions to end this war. Number 1, a ceasefire. Number 2, an amendment of the Ukrainian constitution to make sure that Ukraine will never be a part of NATO. Number 3, recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. And number 4, giving away territories that are already held by Russian separatists in Ukraine. Today, we got a response from Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, about one of these demands, which is not joining NATO. Now, Zelensky wants to cave when it comes to the NATO demand because, to begin with, the NATO alliance did not include Ukraine to begin with. They've been begging and begging and begging, please let us in. NATO did not do that, and now we have the war, the invasion. But here's the problem. We know, at least those of us who don't have our heads stuck deep in our asses, that this is a proxy war between the US and Russia, and Ukraine is caught in the middle. This has been in the making for a long time, folks. You've seen the viral videos online with McCain and Lindsey Graham propping up Ukrainians to fight the Russians. This has been in the making for years. And the problem is, we are not interested in peace. So long as the Ukrainians are fighting our boogeyman, we will fight till the last Ukrainian. We will keep telling Zelensky not to give up, keep fighting, we'll give you whatever you need, weapons, missiles, whatever you need, but keep fighting, please. We will fight till the last Ukrainian. This is the tragedy of all of this. This is yet another Afghanistan. We're hoping that we're going to stick it to the Russians. And who's going to pay the price, by the way? The Ukrainian people and the Russian people, because as you're going to see in this video, these sanctions are crippling to the Russian economy. They're certainly not going to hurt Putin. They're going to hurt the Russian people, but most importantly, even the European and the American people, as you will see in the course of this video. So let's dive right into it, folks. And here it is, in focus tonight. Paying the price, and it's a steep price to pay. Here's some background for you. Russia has always been an important trading destination for the European continent. Matter of fact, I tweeted this before. Any avid reader of history knows that Russia has been vital to European trade for hundreds of years. These sanctions to cancel Russia will have ripple impacts which will end up crippling European economies. You look at the world's map, Western Europe has been always dependent on Russia for metals, for resources, because Western Europe happens to be poor in resources. We're not going to be able to cancel Russia, just scratch it off the map without a steep price to pay. To begin with, Russia and Ukraine alone, these 2 countries alone, account for about a quarter of the entire grains trade, the global grains trade. You cannot cancel the supplies from Russia and Ukraine without having a dire price to pay. And this dire price to pay will be a starvation crisis, specifically in poorer countries that rely on Russian and Ukrainian imports. Food prices will surge across the globe. You're already seeing what's going on with wheat, corn, oats. We're just starting here. It's going to continue to get worse. So long as the conflict continues to go on, but also so long as the sanctions continue to go on. Russia supplies European countries with gas. There is a high degree of reliance on Russian imports of energy, specifically by the most important country in Europe, Germany, which sources over 50% of its gas imports from Russia. The importance of Russia is not just limited to oil and gas or wheat and grains. It is also a vital resource of precious metals, in this case, nickel. Russia accounts for about 10% of the global nickel supply and 6% of the world's aluminum output. But when we dig down in the nickel trade, Russia becomes even more important. Russia is the 3rd largest producer of nickel, according to the US Geological Survey. It is the source of 17% of top-grade supply. About 2/3 of the global nickel production goes into stainless steel, but the metal is key in lithium-ion batteries. We're seeing the shift toward EVs. This will require lots of batteries. To begin with, lithium prices are surging out of whack. And now we have nickel prices also surging out of whack along with cobalt. So the prices of these batteries will continue to move higher. And we will get to a point where these EVs will become so expensive, making it out of the reach of the average consumer. Yesterday was the biggest single-day jump in nickel futures in history. Nickel gained over 60% yesterday alone. And today, prices doubled to a record $100,000 a ton of nickel, to the point where trading had to be suspended in London. So again, Russia is important to the world's economy. We're not going to be able to cancel Russia without a dire price to pay. Even the Wall Street Journal came out yesterday and said perhaps this nickel producer, this metal giant in Russia, might be too big to sanction because it supplies nickel and palladium. Palladium prices are surging out of whack. Palladium is an important component of chips and catalytic converters in cars. Russia is the top producer of palladium. Now, chips go pretty much in everything we consume these days. So if the prices of palladium are going higher, then we're going to continue to pay more and more and more for all of the goods that we consume. Russia also happens to be rich in zinc, tin, aluminum, and many other metals. The prices of those are moving significantly higher. Look at the surge yesterday in zinc and tin. All of these are unbelievable moves, and the consumer in the European Union, in Asia, in Australia, in South America, Africa, US, we're all going to feel the pain. So at some point, our dear politicians must ask the question, are we achieving our goals, our intended goals from these sanctions? Are these sanctions really stopping the invasion or not? And what is the exit plan? What is the end goal here? Because the longer these sanctions go on, the more pain the consumer will feel here at home. More importantly, when we talk about wheat supply, for example, we're not going to be able to replace that supply with 3D wheat printed out of thin air. Talk to Egypt, Turkey, and other countries that import wheat from Russia, Ukraine. How long will they have to feel the pain? Because at some point, this will cause political unrest in these countries. We could see global chaos just like we saw back in the Arab Spring about a decade ago. Now, make no mistake, these sanctions are hitting the Russian economy hard. Even the Kremlin admits that the Russian economy is taking a serious blow from these sanctions. No doubt about it. The ruble is crashing by the day. It is pretty much worthless right now. The point where Putin had to sign a decree prohibiting leaving Russia with more than $10,000 in foreign currency. We have shipping giants suspending deliveries to Russian ports. The Russian economy is not receiving goods, and it's not exporting goods because dock workers in many ports across the globe are refusing to dock Russian ships. And we're talking about blacklisting around 1,700 vessels from Russia. Russian airliners are afraid of flying overseas out of fear that their jets will be impounded. A lot of these jets are leased from foreign companies and foreign suppliers. The moment they fly out of Russia, they will be impounded. This is a lot of pain for the Russian economy. We went as far as banning Russian cats from international competition. The stocks of Russian gas giants like Gazprom, for example, are pretty much penny stocks right now, at least in the foreign exchanges. So there is no doubt that the sanctions are destroying the Russian economy to the point where it's on the brink of default right now. But here's the problem. Russia has alternatives. In the long run, Russia will be able to diversify away from European and American suppliers. Why? Because they have the help of China. So again, the question from all of this has to be to our dear leaders in Europe and here specifically in the United States. Are these Russian sanctions in the long run going to achieve their objectives? What are the objectives, by the way? Or is it in the long run going to hurt the European and US economies and perhaps poorer countries who rely on Russian and Ukrainian imports, but it's not going to damage the Russian economy in the long run? Why? Because Russia has alternatives, specifically China. There is a massive gas pipeline deal going on between Russia and China. And this is going to go ahead with no problems at all. The Chinese are not going to sanction Russia. And what are we going to do about all of that? Are we going to sanction China too? Because pretty much everything we consume comes out of China. Our corporate profits come out of China. This will be suicidal for the American economy. So again, what is the point of these sanctions if they're not going to stop the invasion and the aggression, and they're actually going to push the Russian economy to be more reliant on the Chinese economy? Take, for example, the sanction against Iran. These sanctions have been going on for years now. The regime did not change. And oh, by the way, the Chinese are buying more Iranian oil right now under sanctions than before. Who's to say that the Chinese are not going to continue to buy Russian oil and gas more than they've done before the sanctions? When we look at the spread between Brent and Russian oil is extremely cheap right now. Are we to believe that the Chinese are not going to take the opportunity and buy Russian oil in the black market, taking advantage of these cheap prices? Really? Russia owns $140 billion in Chinese bonds. They can circumvent all of these Western sanctions, and they still have $140 billion war chest linked to China. They can use that to finance the war, and the invasion will continue to go on. What is the point of sanctioning Russia if you're not going to sanction China? And I'm not calling for the sanctioning of China. I'm just pointing out the absurdity of these sanctions by not achieving the objective so far of stopping the invasion, and on top of that, causing a lot of problems, inflation, stagflation here at home. Visa, MasterCard, American Express all suspended operations in Russia. What are the Russians doing right now? They're using UnionPay, a Chinese company, a Chinese alternative to Visa and MasterCard. With all of these online stores banning commerce from Russia, what are the Russians doing? They're using Chinese e-commerce platforms. And Russia still has quiet partners. They're not so vocal about the opposition of this invasion. Look no further than India, Saudi Arabia, UAE. They're sticking by Russia's side. Matter of fact, the State Department called India and the UAE in Russia's camp before having to retract the statement. Why are the Indians, the Saudis, the UAE sticking by Russia's side? The answer is we did not supply them with defense weaponry at a reasonable price. All the regulations and the approvals that the Saudis, UAE, India have to go through before they secure these defense deals from the United States. On the other hand, with Russia, you make a deal, you shake hands, you sign a piece of paper, and boom, you got the weapons. You got all the defense that you need. These countries will not let go of Russia's side. Matter of fact, India is now exploring a rupee-ruble arrangement to smooth all of these sanctions, the regulations of trading with Russia. Even Mexico, south of the border. Mexico says we will not send arms to Ukraine. Lopez Obrador also reiterated that Mexico would not follow many other countries and impose unilateral economic sanctions on Russia after Moscow's invaded Ukraine. He also added, we will not take any economic reprisals because we want to have good relations with all governments in the world. So again, Russia has friends. They have alternatives. The reason is the lack of U.S. leadership in the world in the last few decades. Russia has also been preparing for these sanctions by amassing a massive supply of gold. And now there is talk in Congress that we should sanction Russian gold. This will only achieve higher gold prices, and somebody will buy Russia's supply. If it's not the EU, if it's not China, maybe Peter Schiff will buy it. Anyways, the Russians are also retaliating by suspending steel supplies to European countries. They're also retaliating against the US by halting deliveries of rocket engines. We rely on the Russians, the space program, and now the Russians are retaliating back. And even Jamie Dimon from the Landromat, JP Morgan, he's now warning the West that sanctions on Russia could have unintended consequences and says the market volatility is here to stay. So again, we must ask the question, what is the wisdom behind all of these sanctions? Are they achieving their objectives or not? And how long are they going to stay here? In other words, how long are we, the consumers, have to bear the brunt of the pain? Because there is a limit. We care about Ukraine right now, but we care about our wallets more in the long run. Now, let's segue to the pain of these Russian sanctions on the European economy. We start with Germany. The German DAX is already at bear market right now. Give us a chart of the DAX. Let's look at it and... ooh! The German DAX lost all of the pandemic gains. It is back right at the spot where it was trading at right before the pandemic crash. And this is just the beginning, baby. More pain to come to the German economy because all of these Western European countries are now scrambling to find a way to live without Russian natural gas. The Germans say we're prepared to stop buying gas from Russia. What are you going to do? You're going to replace Russian gas with farting in a jar? How's that going to work? And now the Russians are saying, watch out, Germany. We might hold and suspend all of these gas flows right away. What is the risk, you might ask? Here's the risk. Russian energy has the West in a stranglehold. This is according to Bill Browder. It is going to be hard. It's going to be a tough balancing act. Because 40% of German households rely on Russian gas. Once again, 40%. 100% of Italian households. 100% of Australian households. I believe he meant Austrian households. But regardless, there is a high degree of reliance on Russian gas. When the Germans say we're prepared to forego Russian gas, it's a joke. And natural gas prices in Europe right now have reached the equivalent of a $600 a barrel of oil here in the US. Imagine what the WTI would do to the US economy if it reaches $600 a barrel. This is exactly what's going on in the EU right now. Their economies are crippling as we speak, and the Russians haven't cut the supply yet, and we're already seeing this pain. Why? They continue to talk about renewables and green energy, but in reality, renewables only account for 40% of the electricity that Europe consumes. About a fifth comes from gas and coal. The reliability for renewables is still under question. And by the way, these sanctions and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is pushing the prices of materials that go into the production of these renewables. These prices are going higher. So either way, you're getting hit from both sides. Either way, inflation continues to move higher. On the other hand, the pace of economic activities continues to slow down. The German economy is right now, as we speak, in a stagflation crisis. And this is just the beginning. Next comes a recession, and then a depression. VW, among other German manufacturers, suspended business with Russia. What does that mean? For the top and bottom lines, the revenues and profits will get hit. No doubt about it. They have sales in Russia. As small as it might be, it will still bite the top and bottom lines of these companies. On top of that, a lot of these companies, to begin with, source their materials from Russia and Ukraine. And this will cause a global crisis in the auto manufacturing industry. They're getting hit with a double whammy. Before, it was the thing shutdowns, causing supply chain disruptions. And on top of that, the monetary inflation that has been pushing the prices of these materials higher and higher and higher. Now add more pain to the misery of more supply chain disruptions, of more supply shortages, and this inflation will skyrocket to the point where these car manufacturers have to suspend operations altogether because it doesn't make sense to produce all of these vehicles at an insanely high price. What are you going to sell them for in the open market? Your margins are going down. You might eat a loss by producing these cars. Analysts say the initial impact of the war on some car makers could lower global vehicle production by an estimated 1.5 million vehicles this year. That is 2% less than the 84.2 million vehicles that the industry projected before the war. We thought we're out of the woods. The supply problem in cars, used cars prices are reaching a peak because here comes the supply of new cars. Wait for it, here comes another shoe to drop. It could also lower production by 3 million vehicles. This is according to the analyst. She also added that it is far too soon to know how chaotic global supply chains will become. We have no visibility, she said, even before the Ukraine war. VW was struggling to keep assembly lines at its main plant in Wolfsburg, Germany running as a result of the assorted global shortages and trade route disruptions. Porsche, which is owned by VW. By the way, Porsche lost a bunch of cars when that ship sank, caught on fire and sank. Rest in peace to all of these Porsches and Lambos. But anyways, Porsche halted production in its factory in Leipzig, where it builds the Panamera sedan and the Macan SUVs. Interruption of production at the plant could slow down Porsche's ability to deliver the popular models to customers worldwide. Oh, the pain. Pass the Kleenex, please. Baicheng Mountain said it would idle production next week at its main plant in Dingolfing, where a spokesman said the company builds up to 1,600 cars a day, including its flagship 5 Series, 7 Series, and 8 Series sedans. BMW will have downtime in its Munich plant and its many plants in the Netherlands and the UK because of missing parts. Speaking of the Netherlands, also known as Holland, let's see the impact on that particular country from the Russian sanctions. One of the biggest ports in the world, in Rotterdam, a lot of commerce goes through that port. Here's the problem. Europe's biggest port is where the sharp end of sanctions against Russia look likely to hurt the Netherlands, even if the nation's economic statistics might suggest otherwise. Why? Because the cost of shipping containers shot up to $30,000 per container. This will slow down the flow of commerce. It's just too expensive. What does that mean? You have an economy left with higher inflation and low economic activities at the ports, hence stagflation. And by the way, if they're paying $30,000 per container in Rotterdam, where do you think that cost will land? At the end of the day, they're gonna pass that extra cost down to you and I, baby, the consumer. On top of that, the Netherlands have the highest foreign investment exposure as a portion of GDP to Russia. So there goes Germany and the Netherlands. What about the UK, the Bretons? Are they doing a little better? Well, the UK already cut off Gazprom and they're going to ban the imports of oil from Russia, unlike the EU. This will have a dire price on the UK consumer because, remember this, they have a price cap on energy prices, which will expire in April, meaning next month. After that, the UK consumer will get nuked with the extra costs of living. The utility bills will more than double in certain cases. And the UK has no other choice because if they keep these price caps, their energy companies will get crushed. UK energy price cap could spike to £3,000 per household. The level could spike another 50% after surge in wholesale prices. There is a cost of living crisis in the United Kingdom right now. But The Guardian says soaring gas prices are a cost of this war and Britain cannot avoid them. They also add that consumers in the UK are going to have to come to terms with a lengthy period of rising energy bills. Now, the British public might be supportive of Ukraine right now. Sure, we'll take a hit to help Ukraine. Fast forward a month, 2 months from now, when they're getting nuked and the cost of living is surging out of whack. They'll forget about Ukraine so fast. The backlash will shift to blame the government. In the case of the United States, we're going to blame Joe Biden. We're going to blame the Democrats. And you're already seeing the Democrats and Joe Biden today came out and said this is Putin's price hike. Blame inflation on Putin, not on me. Come on, man. We'll see how this one is going to work out in November, Joe. So we talked about Germany, Netherlands, UK. What about France? France is getting a hit too. Their biggest car manufacturer, Renault, has sizable operation in Russia. They suspended these operations and now the revenues, the profits of this company will drop like a rock. Meaning, once again, the prices of energy that the French consumer pays are going higher. On the other hand, the pace of economic activities, the revenues, the profits of French companies are going down. Hence, stagflation. And what about Turkey, by the way? It's not a European country right now. It's not within the EU, but it is considered within the European sphere. Well, inflation is sky high in that country. They've been facing an inflation crisis even before the war. And the official numbers say that inflation at 54%. This is the cooked number, of course. Inflation in that country is at least 100%, and they rely on a lot of imports from Russia, Ukraine. They will get hit hard. What are the political implications of all of that? Are we going to see a revolution in Turkey? Are we going to see a civil war in that country? And the list goes on and on. What about Egypt? What about the Middle East? What about Africa? What about smaller Asian countries? This could morph into a global crisis, not just economic, but also political. The EU as a whole is becoming very desperate to the point where they had to lift the ban on GMOs. Because you have grains from Russia, Ukraine, that's a no-go. On top of that, fertilizer prices are skyrocketing. Fertilizers come from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. There are sanctions against these two countries, Russia and Belarus. So now the EU is getting so desperate to the point where they're allowing GMOs back in the continent. And perhaps this is the biggest bomb. Today we got the news that the EU is brainstorming, planning another round of stimulus due to the rise of cost of living from the Russia-Ukraine war this time around. As if inflation wasn't here to begin with. Inflation just magically appeared due to the Russia-Ukraine war, not due to the reckless policies of the cabal of central banks across the globe. But anyways, here's the risk. Inflation continues to move higher and higher and higher. The EU's own debt to GDP ratio is almost at 100%. If we get to hyperinflation in this continent, central banks are forced to raise interest rates higher to tackle the inflation problem. These economies will get nuked immediately with this insane level of debt. Now, speaking of debt, let's segue to the good old USA, the king of debt. We have dickhead King Griffin who warned that America's sanctions on Russia are hurting the U.S. in a profound way, and taxpayers will bear the cost. Not him, not his billionaire buddies, not the Wall Streeters, the insiders. The taxpayer will pay the price. The poor, the middle class will pay the price. For a war, by the way, that has been engineered for years, a manufactured war that has been on the plan for years. All of your beloved politicians, the insiders, the deep staters, they've been rubbing the little wieners for years, hoping for this war. But who's going to pay the price? The Ukrainian people and the poor and the middle class of this country. Yesterday, there were talks of an embargo against Russian imports. And again, we do not import a lot of oil from Russia. But a disruption of supply of any shape or form will have impacts on the global market, ripple impacts that will shoot these prices higher. Because it doesn't matter where you buy the oil from. Russia, Saudi, Texas, doesn't matter. These are all traded in exchange markets. in futures markets. You buy them in contracts. You pay the market price. If there is a disruption of supply from Russia, from Saudi, from whoever, these prices will move higher regardless, and you will pay more even if the oil comes out of Texas or Oklahoma. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Exxon CEO who warned and said that the Russian embargo of oil will lead to significantly higher prices at the pump. And today, President Joe Biden came out and formally announced the ban on Russian energy. No more. What is the result of all of that? We're paying the highest gas prices in U.S. history. We have broken the record from 2008, and it appears, at least for now, that we're acting alone, by the way. We in the UK. And the UK, by the way, says it will take a year to phase out all the reliance on Russian imports of gas and oil. Meanwhile, the EU is not participating in these embargoes. They continue to finance Putin's war machine. And please, I'm against all of these sanctions. I think they're stupid, they don't achieve any of their objectives, and they punish people at home. And in these countries that we're placing the sanctions on, look no further than Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Iraq, all of the countries, Iran, that we've been sanctioning for years. We've only achieved punishing the people of those countries and punishing the people at home by higher inflation. But when you talk the talk, you gotta walk the walk. You cannot have the hypocrisy of having private companies suspending operations in Russia while the EU, as we speak right now, continues to buy Russian oil and gas. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but back to the USA, we have jet fuel prices surging out of whack, meaning air cargo costs are also surging out of whack. You add to that, diesel costs are also surging out of whack. You put two and two together, everything we consume will go higher in price because the cost of transportation, be it via trucks, be it via airplanes, will move significantly higher. All of that cost will be passed down to you and I, the consumer. We're going to continue to pay more and more and more. Where is the end here, our beloved dear leaders? What is the end game from all of these sanctions? Because electricity bills on U.S. households will double, and this is extremely alarming when you factor in the fact that we have 21 million households who are already behind in their utility bills. Now double that cost and it will become a full-blown crisis. There is no escape of that. Why? Because when you look at the breakdown, where do we get our electricity from? Well, more than half comes from coal and gas. And again, you might say, Maverick, what is the big deal here? We got our own gas, we got our own coal. As I've said before, it doesn't matter where you get the coal and the gas. It matters in terms of whether it's traded in Chicago, New York, London, Australia, Hong Kong, etc., etc. But you're paying the market price. If there is inflation anywhere in the world, if there is a disruption of supply anywhere in the world, the prices of these commodities will move higher regardless whether you have the supply here or not. So again, folks, so far we talked about the impact on Russia, the impact on the EU, the impact in the US. We must ask the question to our dear politicians. What is the end game here? Because gas prices will continue to move higher. Materials prices will continue to move higher. Everything we buy, everything we consume will move higher. Our bills will double. Our rents are already moving higher, and the Fed remains so callous. The Fed remains in La La Land, led by incompetent criminal Jay Powell. What is the end game here? How much pain do we have to suffer? Because forget about gas, forget about electricity, forget about all of that. You know what the line in the sand is? For us Americans at least, potato chips. Oh yeah, potato chips prices go higher, the revolution starts right away. And guess what? Potato chips prices are moving significantly higher due to the Russia-Ukraine war and the sanctions. Why? To keep Martin Snack's 80,000 square foot South Central Pennsylvania factory humming throughout the thing. CEO Butch Potter has had to shell out 20% more for potatoes than he did pre the thing. His packaging film expenses have increased 35%. Box prices are up 30%. He's also had to raise wages to retain and recruit talent. But here it is. None of his operating costs increases, however, are as extreme as the price hikes in cooking oils, mostly of sunflower and cottonseed variety, that Potter requires to produce snacks such as jalapeno, kettle cooked whatever, and pop sea salted whatever, doesn't matter to me. Cottonseed oil costs Potter 99 cents per pound right now, he says. 18 months ago, it was half of that. Sunflower oil is now 1.28 bucks per pound versus 60 bucks per pound back in September 2020. Which countries happen to be the largest producers of sunflower oil? Yep, you guessed it, Ukraine and Russia. So far, we talked about the pain of these sanctions in the Russian economy, the pain of the sanctions in the EU economy, the pain of sanctions in the US economy. But let's talk about the hypocrisy of the EU, because while we have NATO pouring weapons all over Ukraine, and I told you, we will fight this war until the last Ukrainian, so long as they're fighting the boogeyman for us, the proxy war, that's been going on, by the way, since the Cold War. We had many wars in the same fashion, and the people of those countries get caught in the middle, and they fight the boogeyman for us, and they die doing that. Do we even care? Not really, to be honest. And I'm talking about the politicians and the propagandists at the media, the generals, the deep staters, all of these motherfuckers who came on TV pumping the war. But the hypocrisy is absolutely stunning in the EU, because up until today, Shell has been buying Russian oil and gas. They had to be shamed to stop doing it. Matter of fact, the German finance minister came out yesterday and said the self-initiated energy embargo against Russia does not appear advisable, listen to this, for the sustainability of sanctions against Russia at present. Oh really? What a joke. If you're gonna bark, then put up or shut up. And so far the EU hasn't been putting up at all. Matter of fact, the UK so far sanctioned about $260 billion in Russian bank assets. The US sanctioned about $240 billion. The EU, a pathetic $39 billion so far. Why? Because Putin has been amassing a lot of euros in foreign reserves. The moment they sanction Russian assets in overseas banks, in their banks, they're effectively sanctioning euros. They're shooting themselves right in the foot. And then we have Zelensky of Ukraine, who's been begging over and over again. Please, let us in the EU. We understand you're not going to let us in NATO, but let us in the EU. They won't even do that. What a bunch of hypocrites. And oh, by the way, all of these banksters are licking their chops, waiting to buy the dip in Russian assets. You know that will happen. The banksters, at some point, when all the anger against Russia dissipate, they're going to go to your beloved politicians and say, can you relieve some of those sanctions because we bought the dip in these assets? We want to get richer. And of course the politicians will do that exactly. JP Morgan is already touting distressed Russian company debt as a recovery play, quote unquote. Wow. And folks, with all of this, let's conclude with this message. The founding father of this country, the OG, George Washington, in his farewell address to this nation said, "It is our policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." Why? Because the moment we make these foreign alliances and we commit to them for the long run, we get entangled in these endless wars over and over again, to the point where it bankrupt our country. You think George Washington would approve of NATO? Hell no. Matter of fact, the majority of Americans used to be isolationists and anti-war. It's within our DNA. Why? Because we all came from countries with a lot of problems, a lot of wars, and we seek peace and stability in the United States of America. Your ancestors came here not seeking foreign wars, interventions, and entanglements. They seek peace, prosperity. This is what this country is all about. This glorification of war is foreign and manufactured in this country. Go back to World War I. The United States was not involved in that war because the majority of European immigrants in the United States were anti-war, were isolationists. They did not want war. They escaped war. They did not want this country to be involved in Europe's problems. Matter of fact, the re-election slogan, the president at the time, Wilson, was, "He kept us out of war." Vote Wilson because he kept us out of war. We're a nation of peace. We're isolationists. We only respond when the homeland is attacked. But then came the JP Morgans of the world. The banksters, who had debt and ties to Europe. The UK owed them, Germany owed them money, and they lobbied the Wilson administration to get us into war. There was a lot of propaganda to brainwash the public, to glorify war and foreign interventions. Matter of fact, you might have heard about the 4 Minutes Men. And no, this is not a joke about guys in the bedroom. These are actual guys deployed by the government who used to speak in public squares, public events, sports events, doing war propaganda to brainwash the public to be into the war. They hired the father of propaganda at the time, Edward Bernays, and they managed to manufacture the idea of patriotism into militarism with songs like "Over Here, Over There." All of this is manufactured. War bonds, buy war bonds, support our boys, yada, yada, yada. And then the public became into war. But this is not our nature. It is not how this country was founded. And unfortunately, today, we have all of these Looney Tunes, all of these babies on social media, and even on TV, pushing for war with such thrust. And this is not going to be a traditional war. It's going to be World War III. A nuclear war, but they're so hypnotized with the propaganda. They care not about the consequences. And when we see that, we have to speak up because sanity has to prevail. That is the message of the day. And with that, folks, this is all I got for you for this video. But stick around this evening. We have another video coming up where we're going to discuss the market developments and all the technicals that happened today. But for now, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I will talk to you again soon.